welcome to the World Soundtrack Roundtable on Game Music. Lovely to see you all here, and it's a very special occasion because this is the first of its kind, the first Game Music Award that will be awarded to either of you at the World Soundtrack Awards, and that's 180 years after the invention of photography and like 120 years after the invention of film. And, you know, we'll speak about the much older art form and medium, which is music. And I would like to introduce to the audience tonight's guests. I mean, I'm sure you're all familiar with them already. To my left is Narayan, Riverboy, aka Riverboy, Narayana Johnson, and he wrote the music for Cult of the Lamp. Then next to Narayan is Maclaine Diemer for Firmament, followed by Nainita Desai, and she scored. Do you say scored in game music? You do, because I'm a film musical, you know. So Immortality. And next to her is Grant Kirkhope for Mario and Rabbit Sparks of Hope. And I think that's very tough for the other panelists because you have a name that translates the flamish, like Kirkhope. And, you know, neuroscientists say that we all go for what's familiar. So you have an advantage here with the votes. And the last, but not least, Gregory Nicolette, who scored Potionomics. Warm welcome to you. You can clap now. They came for you from all over the world. And before talking to you, I would like to ask an audience question. Could you raise your hands? Who of you are active gamers? Oh, quite a few. Well, congratulations. You know, you left your cave, your gadgets behind. You came to the real world for real life experience. That's very brave of you. And wow. It's impressive, isn't it?
Yeah. We live in caves too, you know. So the work happens in the cave.
You had a chance. So my first question, a little warm-up round. Do you remember the first time a video game and or a piece of game music has caught your attention, Narayan?
Yeah, I do. So I remember going to a friend's house. I don't know how old I was, but his older brother was playing Super Nintendo, and he was playing Donkey Kong Country, and the soundtrack for that is it's incredible. I don't know how they managed to do it. It's amazing.
Well, you can ask them now.
Yeah.
I didn't hear that one. It was Daniel Wise.
Yeah, Daniel Wise. Yeah, he stretched that chip so far, so he got sounds out of that chip that I don't think anyone else was able to do beforehand. And it's just this like kind of ambient synthy music, and even that young, I remember it like affecting me deeply. I remember like being like wow. So yeah, that's my earliest memory, and I think I remember like humming the melody like days later. But yeah, that's me.
Maclaine.
I'm you know, I just turned 42 recently, so I'm kind of just there at the beginning of existing in a world that there's always been video games the whole time I've been alive, but I'm like right there at the beginning
video
of it.
Native.
Yeah, and so it's easy to say Mario or Zelda, right, which is true, but the sort of piece of music that I remember being like, oh, this is cool and different is from the NES, Nintendo Entertainment System DuckTales game. And it's the Moon level, which is just this like unbelievable. It's like maybe 40 seconds of music, honestly, and it just loops endlessly. And it's to me, it's on the same Mount Rushmore, which is an American monument of four presidents heads. But it's up there with Zelda and Mario. It's like an incredible piece of music.
All right, Nainita.
For me, I used to go to my best friend's house when I was about 7-8 years old.
Secretly,
Because she was rich and she had an Atari console. Oh. So I used to go to her house to play Space Invaders. I'm that old, and so it was the sound effects actually in Space Invaders that caught my attention. But then after that, I remember Tomb Raider 1 was really caught my attention. Thematically, I thought it was a fantastic score, and that really perked up my sort of ears and senses to games music.
Right.
Yeah, and what else? I mean, there was. I mean, I had a PC, an Amstrad PC, so I used to play video games on that as a young teenager. So I was really interested in gaming and games music from that very young age. Yeah.
All right, and you became a sound designer later as
Yeah,
well.
and then I got into doing sound design for video games. So that was my way into music through sound effects and doing sound design for video games.
We'll look at that later on. I'll pass on the question.
So since I'm so old, clearly, I think I remember Pong probably. I think that was my first experience of video games. There's not a lot of music in that. It's just, big back and forward. I remember going to the arcades in Scarborough, North Yorkshire. I was on an orchestra course playing trumpet, and we used to go down to the arcades in the afternoon just to waste our time. And playing in the arcades back then, but it was like probably still not that musical really. It was just lots of bleeps and boops really. So I suppose my first real notice of music in games is definitely Zelda: Link to the Past on the Super NES. That's one that I really liked a lot. I still think it's my favourite game of all time. I thought the tunes in that were amazing. I think that Zelda main theme just unbeatable. So I feel like it was a Zelda thing I really noticed. But I did notice the bleeps and boops, but it just wasn't very musical at the time. So that's me.
But there's nodding, obviously the beeps and boops did what they were supposed to do. Gregory.
Yeah, it's a fun question. I'm going to also go the Zelda route. For me, it was the NES iteration of it. I couldn't believe that this really, at the time, primitive, simple sound chip could create a theme that, for me, stood toe-to-toe with Star Wars. Like, as an example, it just felt so epic, and yet coming out of this such a simple sound. But I'll do one more too, which is a little less popular, which is a game called Wing Commander, which I love that it started out with the first image you saw. It would fade from black to an orchestra, and the conductor would tap his baton, and this was all 8-bit. Well, I guess 16. I don't know what computers were back then, but it was pixel art, right? But they were making a statement at the beginning of that game that this was going to be a cinematic experience, and that the music was important. And I thought that was pretty fantastic, and that always stuck with me.
Thank you. We will look at your game music now in a second. And Narayan, you are a composer. You are a performing recording artist. That sounds like a pretty inspiring profession, socially active, out and about. Why on earth did you decide to go into game composition? You had a life.
Nah, honestly, okay. So I was in a group called Willow Beats, who were like a pop electronic kind of duo, and we toured around Australia. We did like the radio festival thing for a while. We did that for 7 years, and it was good. Like we were doing like pretty well, but it was still like it was a grind as well. It was really tough, like touring all the time, flying. It was like pretty rough, and we just kind of burnt out. And
so gaming was the second best.
No, so then what actually...
It was the way out.
No, so then after then I was like, all right, how am I going to make a living off music and not have to like tour around and constantly play shows? And I was like trying to figure out like different ways. I was selling beats online for a little bit. I was like trying to like doing production work for like rappers. I was doing all kinds of stuff. And then, me and Julian had actually become friends through Willow Beats, and he's one of the directors of at Massive Monster. We had become friends through Willow Beats. He had come to our shows and liked our music. And then, he hit me up to make music on a small iPhone game called Unicycle Giraffe, where you balance on a unicycle and you're a giraffe, which was really fun. I did I think 3 songs for it, and it was really cool. And then a few years later, he hit me up and he was like, we're making a console game now. We'd love to get you on board. And that was, the start of Cult of the Lamb. And
Okay, we'll have a look at Cult of the Lamb now, if you could kindly play it to us. Magic. You don't get that at home. Very nice. Very nice. And that's a very heroic lamp fighting its way through. So I noticed that you mix various elements. I seem to recognize folk music as well as pop patterns, even metal structures and electronica. Was that part of the original conception, or did you think, let's see how many styles I can just throw into there?
Yeah, honestly, so the lead development team were like very, very relaxed with the music, and they had liked my music that I'd made beforehand. So they were kind of just like, look, do you, but then like make it cult. So I had a lot of free reign, and so I kind of just messed around. I just threw a lot of things at the wall. I just like tried everything, and then certain things just felt right in that world. There are kind of like two main sounds in Cult of the Lamb. There is the music that's in the bass, and that's like kind of like meant to feel like at home. It's meant to feel like very like nostalgic and warm and like somewhere you want to go back to. And so that's like very like some of that music you kind of saw it at the bass section of the trailer at the start. Yeah, there's that, and then there's like the kind of dark, like fighting music, which is like meant to sound very like menacing and scary, but also like upbeat. I wanted to use like kind of like contemporary sounding drums, and like I'm quite influenced by like different trap artists, like Clams Casino, and even like some XXXTentacion, and like so I wanted to have like I wanted the drums to feel like modern as well. So yeah, it's just a mix of a lot of things.
And how did you weave them into a coherent sounding soundtrack? Because it takes some leveling and balancing.
Yeah, I think honestly just experimentation. So I knew I wanted to use a lot of vocals as well. So vocals like are quite at the forefront. But I wanted to like mess with them. I wanted to like cut them up and glitch them up because I have this like kind of theory that we all know what a voice is meant to sound like, right? Like it's the most common thing in the world. And so when you mess with that, it's like kind of like uncannily, it's like quite eerie because you're like, that's like not quite right, but it should be right. And so a lot of like vocal manipulations, a lot of like format shifting, which is like digital throat length. You can kind of like play with that filter in a synth, and a lot of chopping up, like doing things that a normal vocal couldn't possibly do. So that's like the basis, and then like just like really heavy drums, and then just like an 808, and then that's kind of maybe one more element, and that's it. That's kind of all. That's what I needed.
Right. Games differ, of course, you know that enormously in terms of genre and style. They're processual games where players decide for themselves which way to go. Linear games where there's more dramaturgic lead. And then the strategy games where basically players look at the same frame time and again. Your music is a hugely important component of Cult of the Lamb because it supports, as you mentioned, the different elements, the fight, the construction of that cult community, the exploration of that game world. How does your soundtrack help players to understand the systematics and to operate within that given framework?
God, so I guess like as I mentioned, like so the bass music, like I almost, you know, those like lo-fi hip hop playlists on YouTube that's like lo-fi hip hop to study to. I almost like pictured the bass music to act like that. So it's like a long playlist of these songs, and like there's like I think there's like 25 minutes of bass music that can play, and I want to add more to it. But that's literally meant to just be like music to kind of vibe out to, and like you're just like doing stuff. It's like keeping you busy. It's like like doing your homework to lo-fi beats, right? Yeah, so there's that. It's kind of relaxed. It's not too like abrasive. All of it is quite quite chilled out. And then with the actually, it's interesting with the bio music. That was like the biggest feedback that I got when I first started on the game. Is I would make a song for like a combat song, and they'd be like, "It's great, but it needs more energy." And I'd always made kind of chilled out like flowing beats before that, and so I was kind of at a loss as to how to add energy. But yeah, just experimented, messed around until I figured out how to add energy, and so those biome tracks are more energetic. At the bass, there's also like some night music that comes in. So like when it fades to nighttime, the kind of all the drums and the bass pull out of the soundtrack, and it's all kind of filtered and doused in reverb. That kind of just gives you like some nice like respite and like a nice like nighttime chill time to like get some extra jobs done or whatever you want to do. But yeah.
And what was the greatest challenge for you, as far as you can speak about it, contracts permitting?
I mean, yeah, honestly, it was a lot. There's a software called Fmod, which is middleware, and it essentially like puts the music into the game. And because we're like a small indie team, we didn't have like the budget to get someone else to do that. So I had to like learn a whole new software called Fmod, which was pretty challenging for sure. And like learning how to use Unity as well, because I'd like give them a sound effect. It would be like in Fmod, then you send them like a string of code that they can like put into the game, and Fmod like determines how that will trigger. But I also would need to go into Unity and test it because they would always mess it up. No offense to them, but yeah, it would often be like a little bit out, and so learning how to like use Unity a little bit as well, just like learning new things, honestly, and also adding energy took me a while. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
No worries.
And we will look at Maclaine's work now. You are a composer for interactive and traditional media, and you have more than 15 years of experience as a game composer. And you have been working on some of the most popular tracks for generations of gaming consoles and PC. It sounds a bit like you're the torchbearer of the Olympic game flame.
No, that's that guy right there.
You can share that.
But yeah, I started my career working on the Rock Band games, kind of when that was at the peak of its popularity as a fad. We didn't like to use the word fad in the office at the time because it implied that it would end, and it did. But it was a great place to be at that time. And I actually started very similarly as a sound designer. For the first 4 years of my career was doing sound design and not music, and I sort of got lucky and had an opportunity open up for me to take over music on a game called Guild Wars 2, which is what I actually do most of my work on, which couldn't be any more different than what we're about to hear. But that's kind of a quick summary of the last 15 years of my life.
Right. You mentioned Guild War 2, that you performed arrangements of and conducted at the first TwitchCon. And also you conducted a large orchestra in Mexico. That is a huge spectrum. Who or what has influenced you most in your development as a composer in general and as a game composer?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a cliche to say John Williams, but it's true, right? It's like saying my favorite band is the Beatles, which is also true and also a cliche. But yeah, you know, that Star Wars obviously is huge, but E.T. is my favorite movie and my favorite score of John Williams. And if I can capture 1% of that, you know, magic in my own work, I could die a happy man 100 years from now. But yeah, that E.T. was my sort of sick day movie. I had the VHS tape, and I would just, you know, and for people who haven't seen it, there's a really useful trick to pretend that you're sick that Elliot does in the movie, which is he puts his, I don't know if you can do this with a digital thermometer, but he puts the thermometer on the light bulb in his room while his mom is sort of out of the room. She comes to check on him, and he's like jumps in bed real quick and puts the thermometer in his mouth. He's like, "Oh my God, I have 100 and whatever fever." And I did that so many times as a kid. I was like, "Wow, he's a genius." And then I would watch the movie, to sort of celebrate his genius at the shrine of Elliot. Yeah, so that's probably what set me on the path. And I would say him and Jerry Goldsmith and Tchaikovsky and Copland, if I had to pick four. Now that's like I'm saying that with all humility. Again, if I could capture 0.01% of any of their genius, I'd be happy.
And what is your style? Is there something like a Maclaine Diemer style?
I don't know, because I'm talking about orchestra stuff, and we're about to hear something so bizarre. I started my career with Grant and I were talking about this morning at playing in bands, and actually very similar to you, where I was touring through my 20s and I had hair and I had huge sideburns and I had a flying V and I was jumping on monitors and jumping into the crowd, and I was kind of a madman, and I had a lot of fun doing that, but I never got paid enough to make a living doing it. And so I eventually had to figure out how to get paid to do it. And the orchestra stuff that I do now is all things I had to kind of backfill. I went to school for music, but I thought I'd be a rock star. So I was obsessed with the Beatles and Van Halen, and the Alan Parsons Project is like one of my favorite bands, unironically. So to me, I hear all that stuff coming out in my music, even if it's some big lush fantasy orchestra thing. So the shorter version of that is that coming from a pop background, melody is always the most important thing to me. And I think that is the most useful in media music, right? I'm not an academic composer. I'm not a concert composer. I compose to tell stories. And melody is such an easy storytelling cheat for music. So, I like to think I'm a tunesmith, that just happens to use an orchestra.
Well, Copland is pretty academic music, also in a very joyful way, but
Sure. But, he has that side of him too. And then he has Appalachian Spring, which is this beautiful sort of joyous, piece of music that I can hum in my head if I think about it. Some of his weird sort of string and piano stuff, string quartets and piano pieces that just sound like bang, 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 bang. It's like, okay, great. I get it. But I'd rather listen to Appalachian Spring.
Well, let's have a look at your work. Let's have a look at Firmament now.
Remember all that stuff? Hello. Wait. Remember all that stuff I said about melodies and orchestra? Where'd that go? So the thing about this game, let me preface this by saying that I hacked that together. They asked for some video. I'm like, this is not a score for the trailer crowd. It's a score for a patient listener, and it's very hard to sum up in 2 minutes. But over the course of my career, this is something that happens, I think, probably to all of us, is you work on a lot of things that never see the light of day. And there was other types of games that I had the potential to work on or were sort of bubbling up from the surface of other studios I was working for. You work on them for years, you put so much effort into them, and then they get canceled. And then you just have to say, well, I guess I can never talk about that. So there was multiple games that were in that sort of vein of science fiction-y, synthy, textural sort of stuff. And I thought, I got to get this sound out of me. And for years, I never had a chance. And then this project finally came along, and I got to dump a decade of these other ideas that I needed to keep my sanity when I'm, sort of working on my orchestration chops. And I got to put it all in this game. So that's what Firmament is.
And you mentioned that it takes a lot of time. We know from video game development can take years. From early concepts and pre-production until the final frame. At what point did you get involved here in this one? At what stage? And how long did you stay with the project?
Yeah, they were maybe a couple years in. So for people who might not know, the studio that made that game is a studio called Cyan. Cyan is another Mount Rushmore. Sorry to use these American metaphors. Mount Rushmore game, or like a monumental studio in the history of gaming, right? If you played computer games in the 90s, you played Myst. It's still the most popular selling game of the 20th century. I think it was finally eclipsed by The Sims in the 21st century. But it's a titan of a studio and a titan of a game, to the point where Myst is a shorthand for a type of visual aesthetic, which they created this kind of industrial Jules Verne-ish, atmospheric puzzle solving exploration kind of thing.
And it has a gigantic, both visual, spatial aspect as well as musically.
And so they were, I thought they went away. I thought I hadn't heard about them for years, but they were kind of keeping it quiet. And they came back with a game called Abduction about 10 years ago, which is a spiritual successor. And then they had a Kickstarter campaign for this. They had a different composer attached to it, but I supported the Kickstarter campaign and said, oh, cool, well, I know who that composer is. At least the music will be good. And about a year later, in one of their updates, they said, we unfortunately won't be working with this person. I still actually don't know what happened. I hope it was okay. But they said, we're not going to work with this person. We wish him all the best. And that was when the light bulb went off over my head. And so I stalked the studio on LinkedIn, and I found the creative director.
How brave.
And I sent him, this never works, by the way.
Did you have an agent at the time?
I have not had an agent, and I still don't. So I'm a one-man operation. So
pick the right fruit. So
I'm availed as speed dating. So I sent this guy a cold email through LinkedIn, and I put together a reel of stuff that I thought might fit the aesthetic. And I said, I'm such a huge Myst fan. If you haven't figured out who you're going to hire, please just consider me. Here's some stuff to check out. And again, that never works. They say, thanks, we already know somebody, or we'll take a listen, and then they never do.
Or they not even get back to you.
Yeah, exactly. They just blow you off. And he didn't. His name is Eric Anderson. He's a great guy, and he listened and he liked what he heard, and he hadn't even thought that, because he had so many other fires to put out. He hadn't thought about music yet, because it was just another new fire. And he said, all right, yeah, we'll talk. And then it was another year before they got to the point where we could talk about music. And I had about 6 or 8 months to work. I came at a great time in my schedule where I had a lull to do it very slowly. So the whole, the essence of it is everything is very slow. And so I worked on it very slowly, and it found it very rewarding.
Luck is at your side, it seems.
Sometimes
Sounds
it is.
Almost a bit too smooth.
I mean, you hear no way more often than you hear yes in this business. But when you get that yes, it feels so good.
Yeah,
it feels so good.
It makes it worthwhile.
Yeah.
Video games are non-linear, so you have to basically adapt to what the player is doing. How did you achieve that musically in Firmament, and how did it affect your composition process?
Yeah, this one actually has a lot less of that than most games, because there's no combat, which is fine with me because I hate writing that kind of music. And there's no killing, there's no shooting. It's literally just about exploring these beautiful environments and solving the puzzles that are set up in the environment. So I thought of this more as I kind of just wrote an album that was inspired by what they were working on, and then and I told them where to. So I ended up kind of acting as the music editor as well. But I wrote this album, about 45, 50 minutes of music, with their guidance and tailored to the different biomes that you explore, and then told them where I thought it should kind of get set up and triggered. But it's very much about setting a mood as a player kind of rounds a corner and some big vista opens up, and that's where the next puzzle is. It'll trigger the piece of music, it'll play for a few minutes and then kind of drift away. And then it won't be until another important moment kind of happens visually that a new piece of music plays. So it was very much like as light as it could possibly be interactively, but it didn't. That's what it needed. Not every game needs an incredibly complex, interactive, and dynamic score, and this one I don't think did.
Right. Yeah, you already answered my next question. And could you tell us something about the creative process between you and the director of the game?
Yeah, when it started, so I sent him my sort of pitch of things that were not tailored to this, and then I said, let me give you 4 or 5 ideas, and you can tell me which ones resonate. 4 of them ended up in the game, but the first one that really kind of sparked him, there's a little bit of it. The second one that has this low bass guitar playing. He said this thing where he's like, it sounds like it's music being made on high tension wires. Like it sounds like it's the music of the environment that you're in. And that was like the hook that I needed to kind of get into the project.
So shared vision or shared image.
Yeah. And he was very hands off. And I told him, look, I'm happy to iterate. I never want to be like, here's my work of genius. I came down from the mountain for you and I'm going to go back. So don't bother me for a little bit. But that I want it to be a collaboration because it's collaborative storytelling, and they put as much heart into it as I do, and so it has to reflect their vision as much as mine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll get back to that eventually. Nainita, hello.
Hello.
You have been, I had to write it down, described by Empire magazine as one of the top 5 composers to watch out for. I'm glad they didn't say 5 female composers to watch out for. That's good. And you are collecting one Emmy after another. And, the World Soundtrack Discovery of the Year award being the most interesting and prestigious one, of course. So what's next? Like the National Treasure of the Year award?
Unlikely.
You have a background as, in mathematics and a background as a sound designer. You have been involved in projects by Werner Herzog and Bernardo Bertolucci for the sound design. And how far did that influence your work as a composer and as a game composer now?
Gosh, that's a big question, Annette. Yeah.
You don't have time for a big answer.
I know. 30 seconds. Well, I was always a gamer as a young teenager. I have a degree in mathematics. And so that really, and I did, I learned computer coding and software programming. And so that really appealed to the geeky side, the nerdy side of my, technology.
Comes with a profession.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I loved sound. To me, all sound is music. The sonic landscape of a film or a TV show or a documentary or a video game. It's all about storytelling and how it affects you emotionally. I was really into the Coen brothers. There's a film in particular, Barton Fink, and the sound design was done by Skip Leavesey and Walter Murch, who did Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now. And that really appealed, that sort of heightened my awareness about the importance of sound in film and all sorts of other projects. So really I wanted to be a film composer, but I didn't know how to go about it. So I got work in the industry as a sound designer, and I remember sending out 100 show reels to this directory that I had, and one of those was a video games company, a video games publisher in the UK, one of the biggest publishers in the UK at the time, called Empire Interactive.
When was that? At about what time?
That's giving away my age. No, actually, it was around the mid-90s.
You were a wunderkind, early beginner. We know that.
Yeah, I was about 10 years old. No, but it was about the mid-90s. And so they got my my basic show reel, and I said, look, I've done sound design for Bernardo Bertolucci and all these other big movies, working at Pinewood and Shepperton.
Nice credits.
Yeah. And they said, okay, come and see us. And so I ended up doing sound design and then getting into doing sound design and music for games like Pro Pinball and World Cup Monopoly and flight simulators and Sheep for PlayStation 1. And so that was 16-bit 44.1 kilohertz music, you know. We had MP3s and so on. So I was writing sort of proper stereo music as opposed to 8-bit or chip music. Chip tone music. So so I got in, and then that company went out of business. Kind of, he sold the company for millions, and I lost contact with all the developers I was working for. So then my career digressed. I got into video, into TV and
See,
film.
I thought it's the other way around.
Yeah, and
Huh.
so that was
You married down.
No, well, I mean, and so I then I thought, where's my career going? I moved into TV and film, and that was like 20 years ago. And so I've been scoring hundreds of film and TV projects. But then I got a call about 4 years ago. I was on Twitter, and I got this DM from this game developer, Sam Barlow, and he messaged me totally out of the blue, this stranger, and he said, have you ever written music for a video game? And because I've got a game and I'd be really interested in working with you. And I just thought somebody was playing a prank on me, and you know, and I didn't. Yeah, sure, you know. And he said, well, I'll be in touch when I sort out all the contracts. And I didn't know who this bloke was, and I forgot about it. And then 3 months later, he said, we're ready to go now. Let's have a talk about the game. And I thought, oh, you're serious? You're a real person.
Where shall I sign?
Yeah. And so he said, I want a composer who has no experience of video games. I lied. I didn't say that I started off in games.
You're so humble.
And he said, I want a composer who's experienced in film, because I'm interested in you know, I'm making an FMV game, which is a full motion video game, which is this genre of video game making that's been fashionable and not fashionable for quite a few years, for 20 years or so. So it's basically film. And there's no CGI, animation, graphics, nothing. It's film, but it's non-linear. And I don't know if any of you remember Bandersnatch on Black Mirror episode, which was a very binary choices that you were given. You know, do you want to fight the man, or do you want to run away, fight or flee? And you had a choice, yes or no, with your controller. And so that was a very limited choice. This is truly diving with thousands of options. It's like a 10-hour movie. So I did his first game called Telling Lies, which was quite successful. And then he asked me to do his next game, which is Immortality. And we worked on that. And that was just, I didn't know what I was doing, you know, because it was so groundbreaking and in its process, and we were coming up with our own system and structures and methodology, and you know, it's not a traditional conventional game. There's no boss fights or combat or exploration. It's basically 3 movies, and it's the game is a love letter to filmmaking. So it appealed to my sensibilities with a background in film, and Sam is actually he loves film. And so we came up with, I mean, maybe we should just watch something.
Yeah, I was just about to say, let's have a look at the musical choices you took there.
Sure.
Oh, that very moment. Very nice, brilliant. That's like a 2-hour movie in 3 minutes.
It's bonkers.
Yeah.
In fact, I had to edit out all the X-rated stuff because it's very, it's a horror. It's an interactive horror film trilogy. And when I was going through a few clips that the games company sent me, I thought, I can't have this for, 3 o'clock in the afternoon in Ghent, So yeah, it's basically the premise of the game is that the main character is Marissa Marcel, and she's an actress that would have been very successful in the 1970s, but she made 3 movies and they were never released. And so you are in an edit suite and you have found these old reels of film, and you, as you can see the way it's devised, you can sort of pick on clips and scrub through them and rewind and fast forward. And they've actually shot 3 films, and one in the 60s, one in the 70s, and one set in the early 90s. And they are genre movies. And Sam, the developer director, he's a cinephile, as am I, and he was very influenced by 1970s transgressive British filmmakers like Peter Greenaway and Nicholas Roeg. And I loved movies, I loved those, The Cook, the Thief, His Wife and Her Lover, and The Draftsman's Contract, and all those, Walkabout by Nick Roeg with Jenny Agutter. They're all sort of this fantastically atmospheric movies. So that scores, and so that the camera techniques that they use, it's graded, degraded. They shot on different types of film. So musically, we played around with the idea of what do I do? I'm not going to score 3 feature films. Because it's just impossible in a non-linear way. So we decided to wrote 3 pieces of music. In essence, I wrote 3 themes, one to represent each film and to capture the essence of each film. And and so it's not literal. It's very psychological and metaphysical. And so the 3 themes are art and life and religion. And so you're following this character who doesn't age through hundreds of years, and it's and you have her alter ego. It's a fascinating story. So we recorded with the Budapest Arts Orchestra and used lots of extended techniques. And, I was writing, mixing in mono and stereo, and to reflect the textures and the aesthetics of the film scores that the films are actually, the original genre movies like 1970s New York City thriller, like Brian De Palma was another influence, like Body Double, which I loved that film, So I was very influenced by just capturing the essence of those styles of film scores. And then Sam and I would have these long conversations for hours on end about film and what influenced him and me, and trying to distill filter some of those into the score. And he's into Penderecki, and he's very much into film scores. So I would so he would give me these analogies, and I'd have to translate them into music. So he said, like, for example, art, the theme of art, what's that really about? And it's about, imagine as an artist, whether you're an author, a fine artist, or a composer, or a writer, and you're trying to capture, you're in the flow, you're in the zone, and you're being a perfectionist. So I'm composing, and you're in this magical zone mode where music is pouring out of you. And I think, well, what would that, and we all experience that, as composers. We have supposedly, writer's block, or, difficult times, torture. It's torturous. Composing music for me is a torturous process.
And it's a very singular profession, like writing prose or academic text. You're basically on your own for a long period of time.
Yes. So the theme had to encapsulate the capturing of perfectionism of composing or writing or creating art. But then I also had to create a subverted theme which was dark and twisted. And that was the antithesis of capturing perfection, which is the torturous side of creating art. And, you know, go as an artist, going over and over and over the same thing again and again until you reach something that you are happy with. So how do I capture that in a piece of music? So that was a challenge. And then we had a supernatural theme, which is what you heard there, is that you hear the piece of music, and then suddenly it shifts into something really weird and unnatural and eerie. And so I was taking, so it's like I'd have, do you remember Stranger Things? And you had the upside down, you had the normal world, and then you had this parallel world. And so we had that in effect. So it's the best way I can describe it, is to have a normal piece of music playing, and then underneath you'd have, playing at the same time but hidden and muted, you'd have the supernatural theme, which would be a mapped version of the main theme, but I would take the orchestra and chop it up and distort it and pitch it down by 400%, stretch it in pull stretch, so that you'd have this warped, sort of quite weird, eerie piece of music, but you could still hear the connection between the main theme and the supernatural theme. So that was a creative challenge in how to achieve what we wanted to achieve, so that as the metadata is tagged, each scene, you can click on any image, any piece of the image on screen, and it will take you to another clip, and it would tag all sorts of sophisticated meta tagging that went on when it was implemented, so that you could switch between different layers, different chunks, and go between the main theme and the subverted theme and the supernatural theme. So it was simple, but also very sophisticated at the same time. So that's it was quite an interesting challenge.
You basically answered 4 questions I haven't even asked. But brilliant. No, that's good. There is one, because you were referring to the difference between writing for games and film music. Other than in film, there is at a game nothing that pre-exists at audio level when you start work. There is no sound, there is no noise. Everything needs to be invented and defined from scratch. Could you tell us something about that initial step, that initial moment, both as a sound designer and as a composer? How did you come up with the first sound and the first tune for Immortality?
It was torturous. I mean, I think the worst thing, I always find, I still, every time I start a new project, it's like a blank page, a blank slate, is I don't know how to do this, and I think in the previous talks today, which have been wonderful, I think Austin or somebody said that you just put anything down, and even if it's wrong, it doesn't matter. You have something to start off with. But with Sam, we would talk. I love diving into research and studying. So I watched a lot of movies, and I thought, well, when we decided we knew what we were not going to do. We were not going to do a pastiche homage to the film genres of the game, and so then we started looking into how to represent the essence of each film and the characters. So we would share lots of Spotify playlists, and I was trying to understand and dive into Sam's mind as to how and what made him tick, and his process and thinking process, because he's not very good at being concise. So he'll talk and talk, and we would come up with some really interesting references, and then I thought, right, okay, I'm going to throw these references away, and we knew we had the orchestral sound palette to work with. I knew that that's what he wanted. And like one of the themes is religion. So I thought, okay, well, let's subvert this. What do you think of when you hear religious music? You think of choirs. I thought, well, okay, I have to use the choir, but we're going to twist it in a way that you've never heard before. And it was always trying to do things left field. That was never follow convention and experiment. So
Thank you. I'm looking at the time. Do we have like 20 minutes at least? Yeah, more or less 15-ish. Okay, then thank you. Let's switch to Grant's work. You have written music for video games that have sold partly over 30 million copies. And in addition, you are scoring. Yeah, that's what the statistics say. You know, believe in numbers. And you're scoring films for such as The King's Daughter, starring Pierce Brosnan and William Hurt. So my first question is, why bother writing music for film? Isn't that just underpaid work, reaching just a limited number of people?
I think, like, being the age that I am, I think movies have still been a big kahuna to me, like, over the years. And so I've always fancied having a go at it, but I just didn't really get around to it for a long time. And I just bumped into someone in LA that happened to have his hands on this movie. He was looking for a composer, and we did it with Jonker and Joe Metcalf together. And so that was fun. And I did GoldenEye right back in the day, so it was quite fun doing GoldenEye video game and then but scoring Pierce Brosnan again, but in a wig on this time, a bit of a long wig, so it doesn't look too great. No, you know, it's super fun to do, and I'm keen to do everything from like mobile phones to movies, right? I don't care what it is. Somewhere in that bracket's fine with me. I don't really care.
You studied at the Northern College of Music in the UK, which seems to be quite a talent factory. Did you back then already think about writing music for games? Was that an option at all?
No, I was a terrible composer back then. I failed the
That's
harmony.
what they all say.
No, but I truly was. So you had to pass the harmony exam like 1 year out of 4, and I failed it every year apart from the last year. And only scraped by the last year. I was terrible at harmony. So quite how I managed to compose, I don't really know. And I was a trumpet player. But all I really wanted to do was be in a metal band, right? I wanted to be in Judas Priest or Iron Maiden or Van Halen or something like that. So I wanted just to do that. And I was kind of at college for 4 years just to waste 4 more years of not getting a job, really. So I just wasted time doing that. I did pass in the end, bizarrely enough. Yeah, I was terrible at harmony, so I would never have dreamt of being a composer. It was a complete fluke.
I see. Games rescued you, basically.
Well, there was a rescue, but I felt like I spent from 22 to 33 on the dole at the unemployment in the UK. So I was mostly playing in bands, going on tour, coming back, playing in pub rock bands for £35 a night, signing on the dole, going on tour, just rinse and repeat.
Yeah.
So I've done everything from the worst toilet known to anybody playing in a band to Wembley Stadium. So we ended up playing. I played in a rock band called Little Angels, who were quite a big UK rock band for a while. We ended up doing, a 6-week tour with Van Halen, a 6-week tour with Bon Jovi, and a 6-week tour with ZZ Top, and playing these massive arenas around Europe. 90,000 seat arenas, which was great fun, but it didn't last.
And who were your musical role models at the time? You mentioned so many bands.
Well, it's just all those guys, right? So massive like Judas Priest fan, Queensryche, Queen. More recently, Nightwish. I'm probably a bit late to the game, but all the kind of traditional metal stuff. That was what I wanted to be.
Right. Well, let's see whether we recognize any of these in Mario and Rabbids. Okay, bring it on, please.
Lots of Nightwish in there.
Lots of Nightwish.
So Mario and Rabbids are established trademarks, one you could say. How did you compose and adapt the music to these familiar characters and worlds?
It's a bit crazy getting to write for Mario, right? If you told me in 1995 when I started on the original Game Boy with like 3 monophonic channels and a noise channel, that I'd end up writing a full orchestral score for Mario, and I said, you were crazy, right? So it's a bit ridiculous that I ended up doing that, and twice. So I don't know, really. I feel like, a bit like Nainita says, you always say you can't do it. If you look at the mountain, you're never going to do it. You just take the next step, right? Write the next note, write the next chord, and then hopefully the little baby steps get you there. When I first went to see Ubisoft guys about the game, they'd kind of meant me to say, it's a Rabbids Kingdom Battle game, and can you come meet us in Paris to talk about the game? And so I went along, and we took it to the back of the studio. It was like lots of huge security doors. I was like, this is a bit crazy for a Rabbids game, And I got to the little side room where they were like waiting for me, the creative director Davide Soliani and the audio director Romano Brio, and they said, we'll show you the game, right? So I turned the TV on, and Mario stood on the TV, right? And I kind of thought, I said, they're probably playing Mario again, they're kind of bored, I was a bit late, So they started to move the controller, and because Mario starts running about, and I was like, hang on a minute, what's this? What's the Mario game? Did no one tell you that? I was a bit like, no. So I instantly had a heart attack, and my head went completely pale, thinking, how on earth am I going to write music that Koji Kondo has done for all these years? He's like the Jedi Master. I'm like, I'm going to be a Padawan, right? So how on earth was I going to do that without pissing off the entire world and my kids at once? So so it was a very daunting, I mean, equally exciting as super frightening, you know. So I say it all went very well, but I didn't feel like that at the start. In fact, they said to me they thought I hated the game because for the first hour I didn't say anything. It's because I was so shitting myself, thinking, how am I going to do this, that I just sat there thinking it's just going to be a disaster. So, so it's pretty scary at the start, but all right at the end.
It's legacy work. And how did you conceptualize the music so it remains interesting for both new players as well as, veterans of the game?
I don't know, really. I suppose I did have to use some of Koji Kondo's themes a little bit. There's a Peach's Castles, and that's the second game in the first game. So I used the theme from Mario 64, which I really like, for the castle, and I did that, arranged that, and kind of cut it up into bits, a bit of me, a bit of Koji Kondo, a bit of me, and sent it off, and he seemed happy with that. I guess I feel like every composer, a bit like when I hear Brian May play the guitar, I know it's him without even knowing it's him. When Eddie Van Halen play the guitar, I know it's him without knowing it's him. And I feel like all composers will have our own little things that just sound like us. So I feel like even though I was trying to write music to resemble the Crazy Rabbids, and of course the most famous plumber in the world, Mario, it still sounds like me as well. So I feel like it's a bit of a mixture of all those things. And I just think that you just have to do your best, right? And hopefully that Koji Kondo doesn't think you're terrible. So I did have to arrange some of the famous Mario get your little ditties that happen throughout the game, like the game over ditty, that thing, right? I had to rearrange that for orchestra. And so I just had to do it by ear. And I did it and sent it off, and I hadn't got the notes wrong. I got some of the register wrong, and something was below too high, something was too high. And I got a little bit of sheet music sent back from Koji Kondo, which is like Mario Game Over piece. And I just kind of sat for a minute thinking to myself, my God, here I'm sitting in a room with a little bit of sheet music from Koji Kondo. It was one of those moments you kind of pinch yourself thinking, this is crazy. And equally, when I was doing some of the cinematic sequences, my son walked past my room and saying, Dad, there's Mario on the screen there. What are you doing? And I said, I really don't know, Max. So it was a kind of crazy thing. So, it's been a fantastic ride, I've got to say, but I've had great fun doing it. But it was super scary.
Thank you. Oh, I'm so sorry we have to rush through to Gregory. You're not a newcomer to the game either. And
actually, it's my first go around in the gaming industry. I did do a couple other games before this one, but they didn't make it through. I think you had mentioned that you had that experience as well. Yeah, it's a lot of. So this is the first one that got released.
But weren't you involved in the Disney in the Disney game series that was developed that caught the attention of the commissioner for Potionomics?
Yeah, you're right. I did do a little bit of orchestration for a game called Disney Connect Adventures, and that was maybe one of my first forays into games. But then with Disney specifically, I got involved as a score composer for some of their younger animated series. I've done 4 of their shows, Tots, Puppy Dog Pals, Goldie and Bear, and a new one called Pupstruction. And it was part of the reason that Jadi on Potionomics that we're going to see tonight was interested in working with me.
And I read somewhere that he was looking for some Pixar inspired aesthetics. How would you describe the Pixar inspired aesthetics?
It's such. I'm so inspired by those films. I love how they work on so many different levels to speak to you if you're really young, but then the plot lines will also have these other nuances to them. And so when he said that, I was really excited. And there's just a wide range of musical lineage there also to draw on. The Pixar specifically, what he meant when he was asking me this, though, was that the visuals he was going for were of Pixar quality. The game itself, and I apologize, I didn't actually quite know what the video would be used for, and I did not include any game footage, so you'll have to imagine Pixar quality animation along with the video you're about to see. But it's true. We're a little indie game, and the animators on this project were able to channel the most expressive characters that I've seen in a video game before, all 3D rendered. Didn't have to be that for this style of game. It could have been a 2D game, but Jody really wanted that art style.
And was it restrained being confronted with such specific expectations?
Oh no, I mean, for me, it's absolute freedom to be asked to do something so ambitious in a weird way, because you know, a lot of my work, a lot of my background is orchestral, and knowing that we were going a Pixar route meant that I would probably be using orchestra. We were going to go for a cinematic vibe. And I was really excited about that, because a lot of the projects I'd done before that, there was a lot of direction to avoid using orchestra. Even for the Disney stuff, you know, just because orchestra, in a way, in its purest form, an orchestra can be perceived as boring to some people, right? It's the same set of sounds we've heard used for hundreds of years. And I agree. I think that's true. If you just have the orchestra, maybe you don't have enough personality in your project to separate it. You still have melody and harmony, of course, to work with. But for modern video games and for modern TV shows, we're looking to use a hybrid approach and come up with a sound that is unique to that project. And that's true for this game, and it was true for all the shows that I work on for Disney as well. And so the orchestra is always a foundation, but I'm looking to bring in elements that are unexpected and new, and you know, give it those signature sound.
Let's have a look at it.
Sure. Oh, and by the way, I wanted to just quick shout out to my buddy Thor Feinberg for a last minute 5/1 mix on this, because he did me a huge favor. So I realize now that may not really feel like Pixar to anybody. I should have given it a little context. That was a boss battle scene, as you could maybe guess from the intensity of it, for a character called Roxanne, and her theme is actually pretty much a tango inspired by Astor Piazzolla. Was a reference that I was thinking of when I wrote it. And then my challenge was to take that and turn that into a battle theme, which in and of itself yielded some pretty fun results, I think.
Yeah, it looks and sounds fun, definitely. And the decision to record full score orchestra with these big band passages and soloists for more than 2 hours, did it take some convincing in terms of budget level, considering it was your first proper game commission?
You know, Jody, I was lucky to be working with a developer that, even though we really only had an indie budget, he had some experience working with orchestras before and seeing them live, and he just really wanted that for the project. And so, you know, we didn't have a huge budget, but we stretched it as far as we could, and I called in a lot of favors. And, you know, you have me there on melodica. I'm completely free. I did not pay myself for that job, nor should I be paid for that work. But but you know, no, it was a challenge for sure. Working it all out on a budget, and you're staring at spreadsheets, trying to figure out what you can afford, which tracks can be synthesized, which tracks need an orchestra, which you're going to do with a smaller ensemble. And I actually went to the session with more music than I thought I could record, knowing that I probably wouldn't get through it all. But if I did, I wanted to, you know, get to those tracks. So I would prioritize what I had to record, and if I didn't get to it, I would synthesize it. Those are the kinds of things you have to do when you're on a slightly smaller budget.
Yeah, and it's also investment. I mean, that's obviously advice to up-and-coming composers, that you are sometimes investing in a score with your own means in order to build up your credits and you know, attract larger commissions that will then probably refund. And in how far did your training at the side of Disney composer Buddy Baker influence your musical journey?
He was the first teacher that I had, and it wasn't a very long mentorship. I did a workshop in New York when I was first year of college, called the ASCAP Film Scoring Workshop, and it was one of the last years that he chaired it before passing, and he was a man of very few words, and what he mostly told me to do was just remove, take away, make it simpler, which I obviously did not listen to in that scene. but yeah, he taught me to just sort of center on a single idea and know what that idea is, and then present it clearly. He was all about just getting your melodic idea clearly on the page, and so that the listener can track it and know what the theme is, and then once the listener knows the theme, that's when you can start varying it and using it in different contexts, slowing it down, speeding it up.
And was it a case of the first idea is often the best one?
No, it really depends. The main theme for the game, we iterated and iterated and iterated. I think I had 12 versions of that. But some of the other themes in the game, I would show it to Jody, thinking he would toss his hands up in the air, but then he loved it, and they would go very quickly. I find myself iterating more on my own work than I do being asked to rewrite these days, and maybe that's just the mark of having a little more experience. I do a lot of writing and then sort of listening back to my own work and giving myself notes. You sort of have to separate those processes. You can't be judging your work as you're writing it, but if you can write it, step away a couple of days, come back to it, I usually can see it with a fresh enough ear that I can make it better at that point.
I'm so sorry. It's just an hour we've been given for what is basically 5 hours of conversation. A quick final round. What would be your advice for an up-and-coming composer striving to, enter the game music business?
Yeah. So I think first of all you have to get good. Which sounds obvious, but I think you need to make music every day. Like you need to be good at your craft. And then I think you need to plant seeds, and you just need to put yourself out there. Be a kind person. Like go to gaming events. Don't hit up developers and say, "Do you need a composer? Do you need a composer?" I mean, unless it can be done in the right way. But from my experience, like game developers these days get hit up by so many composers that it's like almost like white noise when someone says, "Do you need a composer?" So just like be interested in what they're doing, ask them questions, be a genuinely nice person, and then eventually they'll maybe ask you like, "What do you do?" And then you can be like, "I'm a composer." That's the way to approach it, in my opinion. And then just like plant little seeds. Like I met Julian on Twitter. He followed Willow Beats. And I saw that he had a gaming looking icon, like a kind of cartoon graphic. And I saw that he made games, and I hit him up and I said, "Oh, do you make games? I love games." And like that message changed my life. So yeah, plant lots of little seeds, get good. That's my advice.
Thank you.
The thing I always say when I talk to students or somebody's nephew or cousin who wants to get into games is it's all about patience and persistence. And both of those, you have to be extremely patient sometimes, and with persistence you have to be nice, right? You have to be sort of gently but kindly persistent. I ran into a friend that I graduated from college with 20 years ago just this past week, and I hadn't seen him in a while, and we were kind of marveling that we were still here. And I always think about this like survivor guilt of like there's countless people that I think are so much more talented than I am that have dropped away 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, because for one reason or another, they couldn't make the life work for them. And I understand why in a lot of cases, but sometimes you really are the last person standing and the job goes to you. So you have to be patient. And, I didn't even write a note of music for games until I was 31. So, when I talk to some 22-year-old, it's like, I just graduated from USC and I'm losing my mind. I'm like, hey kid,
that's nothing.
Take a deep breath, yeah. So,
well, you can support fellow artists. That is also a way of...
I do try to make sure that the door remains open, and I have people write additional music or give my time freely. I think that's important too.
Right. Nainita.
All of what the guys have said, yes. But I think never giving up, learning your craft, be the kind of person that you want to work with. People want happy, smiley people. And I'm not saying that you have to be phony and fake, but be true to yourself and be honest and create your own a sonic identity, your own musical voice, and that takes time. You know, you can't just hatch out and be a composer for projects just, you know, newly hatched. It takes time to develop your voice, immersing yourself in the industry, going to games conferences, being part of games jams, and working sort of from the ground level up, and also never giving up. You know, don't be, if somebody, you know, if you send out 50 reels and nobody bothers getting back to you, just don't give up, but be polite. It's a fine balance between making a nuisance of yourself and keeping in touch with people and just reaching out and just be, you know, I mean, coming to Ghent is fantastic because you get to meet so many people in the industry. So here you go. You know, it's the first step. Yeah. Thank you. Keep at it.
Yeah, I'd say all those stuff, you know, like you could write the best music in the world, right? And you could be brilliant, but you put it on YouTube somewhere or a website somewhere, no one's going to hear it. No one's going to find it, right? So it's a given that you have to be good. You have to get into that space where people are doing the thing that you want to do, right? And that, I like to say game jams, all the rest of it. I've got two examples, like Danny Baranowski is a good friend of mine. He did Super Meat Boy, Binding of Isaac, Crypto the Necrodance. He was a guy that worked in Lowe's, Home Depot in America. So just a guy in a shop wanted to be a video game composer. He actually ended up covering one of my pieces from Perfect Dark and stuck it on OC Remix, and the guy that made Cannibal heard it and got him to do the gig, right? And then Danny wanted to do great things. Equally, Daniel, C418, the guy that does all the Minecraft stuff, the early stuff, he was just a German kid, 17-year-old, in a chat room when Notch was looking for someone to write music for Minecraft, right? And just Notch was saying, anybody there want to write music? I can do it. And he got the gig, right? You know, so I feel like you've got to be in that space that people are doing the thing you want to do. So, and also, when you get the job, don't argue with the creative director, you're just going to get fired. There's 8 million people stood behind you who want your job. It's a waste of time. Just do what they want, right? You know, you may think you know better than them, but that's probably not going to work because they don't want to hear your opinion a lot of the time. You want to just do what they want you to do, right? So I feel like that's super important. And I just feel like that thing about Nainita says, a lot of us composers are pretty introvert. We sit in darkened rooms all day not talking to anybody, right? So I feel like you've got to have that happy face, sad face thing, like you see the actors thing and the BAFTA symbol, right? I feel like you've got to get good at being funny and jolly and all that stuff when you're in that kind of company. Because you may not be like that really, but when you get in that with people like that, they don't want to deal with somebody who's hard to deal with. They want to deal with someone that's easy to deal with, right? So just learn to be that not daft, but just, you know, you've got to learn to put on that persona a little bit. I think it's super essential because it's hard to deal with somebody who doesn't want to talk. So most of us don't want to talk most of the time, right? So I think that you have to kind of get that thing going. So when you get the chance, you can be amicable and you can get along with people, all that stuff.
Gregory.
Yeah, a lot of great stuff there. I'd like to reiterate what's been said, just putting yourself where people are that do what you want to do. I got the Postgenomics gig basically because I asked somebody on the street for directions to a party, and that person ended up being the coder in this game, who then went to bat for me and said, I only want to do this game if you bring on my buddy Greg. And it's like, wow. I mean, I wouldn't have gotten that project if I wasn't in that crosswalk at that one time, right? A couple other things, just always say yes when you're starting out. I think if you throw yourself into situations doing things you don't know how to do, you will find yourself stretching yourself in ways that will probably definitely be healthy for you. It also helps you later draw boundaries against things that you don't want to do. So say yes to everything you can. You'll learn so much. You meet so many people. And then finally, just think on a long time horizon. The day you decide to become a composer, presume that it's going to take you 10 years from that day to actually achieve that. And think of all the things you can do in that time frame. That's a lot of time, right? So just think about it as long as you can. Be patient, and you'll eventually get there. Last man standing, like you said. Yeah, that's all I got. Thank you.
Let me add one piece of advice from the talent agent's point of view. I keep telling my clients, if you are not involved in a project right now and completely buried in work, go to the opera, go to dance performances, go to the cinema, go to musicals, read books. It will improve your writing skills because, you know, filmmakers, game developers, they're highly discursive people. And they want to engage in a conversation with you, which they can't do with AI. This is interesting. We didn't touch on this at all, but for the next panel that we will, you know, schedule that has a 3-hour length probably. Well, thank you very much. And I don't think we have time for audience questions. No, she says. Thank you very much for coming out of your caves, leaving the console behind. Maybe you'll be rewarded. Look to your left, right. Maybe there's a future lover or partner out there in the real world. And yeah, thank you very much for being such a wonderful speakers and audience.
Thank you.
Thank you.